How's it going, everybody? What's happening out there? All is good in the hood. Just got back from DC yesterday. Went to the Senate banking hearing on digital assets, the market structure discussion, which was quite interesting, which I think we're going to dive into. So I won't give too much away there. Otherwise, feeling good, ready to. I think it's funny. It's like towards the beginning of these weeks, I keep thinking to myself, like, not enough happened this week to really talk about with Julie. And then you come up with this agenda, and then I think about all the stuff that went down. I'm like, we're never going to cover all of this in an hour. It's not even going to happen.
Yeah. I think I may have been on mute for the first 30 seconds. I just turned my mic on too, so
Got it.
we're gonna work through every possible technical glitch along the way over the
Love
first
it.
few weeks of doing this, and we'll
Yep.
get there eventually. But I think the audio's on now. So
Sounds good.
let's jump into it, shall we? First thing we're going to do is, as I get the right tab open, so top of the agenda for things that happened. Well, notable developments, notable pieces of news this week. This isn't really a piece of news from this week, although I kind of discovered it this week. But this is kind of a funny one. There was a bill introduced federally by some in the House
Some
by,
Democrats, if I'm not
I
mistaken.
believe, Representatives Van Hollen, Kane, and Padilla, which has sought to apply a raft of sanctions, essentially, against El Salvador and President Bukele. I think the bill is called something to do with, it's a sanctions
Yeah.
bill, right? So there's a bunch in it, but then there's relevant, I guess, for us. There's a whole section on this related to cryptocurrency as a vector for Bukele regime corruption.
Yeah, it's quite intense and quite pointed. Not just regime corruption, but Bukele regime corruption
Bukele
for sure.
himself, Bukele
Yeah.
regime corruption, and the idea here would be this would be a bill that would compel the Secretary of State to produce a report. Of course, the Secretary of State being ultimately responsible for these types of things. It's not something that Congress can just do, but I guess you pass a bill
Yep.
and you can force the Secretary to do it. To produce this report all about corruption in El Salvador, and then for kind of Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency part, it would kind of force this massive disclosure of everything related to Bitcoin that's going on in El Salvador. Like,
Yep.
how much money have they spent? How much Bitcoin have they bought? What are the addresses? Who are the individuals involved? Are they using it to evade sanctions? So I guess suffice to say, an extremely aggressive Bukele Bitcoin targeted bill being introduced in mid-June.
Yep. I'm just actually looking over here at some notes on this. I'm going with two computers today, ladies and gentlemen, because we had a bit of a technical difficulty with my normal computer last week. So anyway, so it was interesting. I tweeted out your post on this, and I said feels like legislation the IMF would have pushed these senators to craft. And I say this because, so for those who are unfamiliar, I think it was a few months back now, the IMF gave El Salvador, I believe it was a $1.5 billion loan. And the stipulations of that loan were quite brutal, in my opinion. Many were related to Bitcoin. The country cannot use its electricity to mine Bitcoin. It had to stop buying 1 Bitcoin a day. It had to stop the Chivo wallet. There was a bunch of stipulations in there that I wasn't too fond of. And someone like, I think it was John Dennehy, the founder of Me Premier Bitcoin, who lives down there, he was quite vocal about, and he was nervous because he understands kind of what these IMF, before getting into Bitcoin, he was a journalist who covered a lot of IMF happenings, and he was quite nervous to see this deal signed. I think the part that's confusing here is that El Salvador has continued to buy. I think it's like a Bitcoin a day is their normal, is like modus operandi there. So it's a little bit weird to see. Alex Gladstein responded to my post. So Alex, being the chief strategy officer of the Human Rights Foundation, he has his feelings about the situation in El Salvador. I think he often very openly refers to Bukele as someone with at least some dictatorial tendencies.
Yeah, dictator adjacent, at least.
Dictator adjacent, yeah. So Alex said yes, so I agreed that there was some sort of IMF influence on this. Here, he said, and they would have no teeth if the El Salvador government was transparent about what it's doing with the taxpayer-funded Bitcoin, but it's not. So that opens the door to this nonsense. I thought that was actually quite interesting. He kind of agreed with me, but said there is some stuff going on there that's sort of making people look at it a little bit more closely. So,
yeah, that's great intel. I guess it makes sense that there's some IMF pressure being applied. The other thing that I thought was maybe perhaps worth noting is that Representative Van Hollen, if I'm not mistaken, was just down in El Salvador. He was like kind of the chief representative of the Democrat side of the U.S. government, instigating this controversy around the Salvadoran man who was deported and then going to be held at CCOT and all this stuff. I don't know if I'm 100% right on that, but I think it was Van Hollen who could have been down there himself.
It wouldn't surprise me. We'll get to this in a second too. Like he does seem to be sort of, in a good way, I would say, in the weeds on some of this stuff. Like he seems to be someone that does their homework. And I'm saying this from having been in the room at the Senate hearing with him yesterday. He was the one senator, I think, especially on the Democratic side, who really came in with like evidence. He had something to say, and he brought his evidence with him. And it was actually, I was sort of like, okay, well, you might disagree with this guy's perspective, but it seems like he's someone that does their homework. He seems like a boots on the ground sort of human being, not just like he has staffers doing it, but he actually like either goes there himself or tries to wrap his head around these things versus sort of just being dictated. I don't know, just having talking points dictated to him. So that wouldn't surprise me if that were the case.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll definitely get into the hearing from yesterday in a moment.
Yeah.
But maybe that main takeaway from this, we probably don't expect this bill to go very far.
No.
It's more of a political statement than a likely policy outcome. But interesting to see Bitcoin and Bukele featuring in this kind of ongoing drama.
And I think also, I was going to say one last thing for context there too. It feels a little weird to me. Marco Rubio has been down there. So it's our Secretary of State in the U.S. has been down there, I think, speaking with Bukele, not really about any of the Bitcoin stuff from what I understand that may have come up, but more about housing some of our prisoners. So El Salvador becoming almost like another Guantanamo Bay or something like that, a place like offshore where we can house people. And I may not have all those details correctly, but I would assume there's some sense of like Democrats not liking that. And this is one of the ways they want to try to get back at them. Just my opinion. I don't know, just maybe a little bit of color there based on what I've been paying attention to.
There are definitely a few intertwining issues converging around Bukele and El Salvador.
Feels that way.
Let's move on to this is a post from you, and in fact an article from you from this week about the Tornado Cash case.
Yep.
And then specifically kind of an appeal to OFAC, CoinCenter's involvement. I guess there's a lot to get through here. Maybe just high level.
I could do it quick.
Talk about what is the Tornado Cash case?
Yes, great question. So there's two major cases happening in regard to right to use crypto mixers. One is Tornado Cash, which is a smart contract that mixes funds on Ethereum. And for anyone out there who's like, why are we talking about Ethereum? It's because you may not like Ethereum, but this will impact all open source developers. So please don't let that get in the way of, paying attention to what's going on here. So this was, a lot of people think this was sort of part of the Biden era sort of regulation by enforcement. Again, Tornado Cash doesn't touch user keys. So according to 2009 FinCEN guidance, you'd have to actually take control over users' funds if you're a money transmitter. Yet Roman Storm, his trial will start on Monday. I will be in the courtroom to cover that all next week. I'll make time to do this with you, of course, next Thursday, but I will be there otherwise. So he basically created this technology, deployed it, and some people used it for illicit purposes, and that sucks. We don't want to see that or whatever. And what's scary about that, in the Netherlands, one of the people he started this with, I'm totally forgetting his name right now. It's not Roman sterling off. Now that was Bitcoin fuck. I'm spacing out on who it was in the Netherlands who was tried on this, and the judge in the Netherlands ruled that we don't care if you didn't create, if you weren't involved in the actual illicit funds being put through the software that you created or the smart contract that you created, you're going to jail for 5 years. So we don't like to see that. Luckily, European law, there's no sort of like influence that's going to have on American law, ideally, I should say. So anyway, Tornado Cash, a mixer on Ethereum. The other big case with this being the Samurai case, which is a different sort of technology, but also a Bitcoin or a crypto mixing technology that was built for Bitcoin. So really important stuff. This news was, I won't say it was a nothing burger. It was something worth reporting on. But the bigger news was the fact that OFAC in March took Tornado Cash off of their sanctions list. That was actually the really big thing. But part of this appeal from Coin Center, I think, is part of the reason that happened to begin with. But I think this was more of like something that was sort of not ceremonial. I forget what the word is, but it was just the court saying like, yeah, procedural. The court, this no longer needs to happen because, this is done. It's been taken off the list. There's no real reason for this appeal to exist anymore. And so the appeal is done, which is a good thing. So happy to see that for sure. And like I said, the one big question is how much will this appeal being done and the technology being taken off the sanctions list, how much will that have an effect on the actual criminal trial that will start on Monday? Roman Storm, one of the 3 developers for Tornado Cash. We don't have the answer to that yet. We're hoping it does. And I also want to give a shout out to, it was like, I forget how many people did this. Let me bring it up quickly. But I know it's Zach Shapiro from the Bitcoin Policy Institute and the DeFi Education Fund, and a bunch of other people filed an amicus brief this week, again, highlighting the fact that based on FinCEN guidance from 2019, these people like Roman Storm should not be prosecuted. They should not be taking, there shouldn't be civil action being taken against them. So again, it was Bitcoin Policy Institute, Paradigm, DeFi Fund, Crypto Council, Digital Chamber, Solana Institute, Blockchain Association. And again, this is a place where we want to try to not start saying, why are we affiliated with these shitcoin, blah, 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 blah. Like, this is sort of an all hands on deck situation where we don't want any sorts of open source developers getting persecuted and prosecuted. So let me stop it there.
Great roundup. And of course, as you say, anybody with any interest in the protection of developers writing and publishing open source software has an interest in this case. So great to see we'll see, as you said, what happens at the criminal trial, but some positive momentum. Cool. Let's talk about NPR. I think this may have been the story, or maybe there's another story.
There's another story. I just added this to the
story. Okay.
So I was interviewed for four separate interviews for a recent Planet Money episode, which is kind of old news. If you go to my Twitter, if you go to my X account, you'll see a pinned tweet about what I told NPR versus what they actually published. And they didn't publish anything where, I was saying something terrible or whatever. It was just very much taken out of context to fit the narrative they were driving, which is Trump corruption, which is fine. If that was their narrative, that's totally fine. But there were plenty of things that I told them that would have countered other points that they made in the story. And that was what bothered me more than anything. The reason I put it back on the agenda today is I think this was the last thing we were going to talk about last week. We didn't get to it. And 2, you'll hear my voice on the morning edition of NPR tomorrow. They're going to be quoting me from this episode. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't like what I said or the way it was clipped. So just saying, just as a heads up to everybody listening, if you do listen to NPR and you hear the morning edition tomorrow and you hear my voice, make sure to check my, I posted it on LinkedIn. It's my pinned Twitter thing.
Make sure to get the real story, the real whole story.
It's more, I did say that it's sort of awkward for Bitcoiners to have the political class here. And I think that that's true. I think a lot of Bitcoiners, people who are advocates for the separation of money and state, to have to engage with the political class. And that's fine. I don't mind that people feel that way. I don't mind what names they get called because I engage with the political class, whatever. That's all fine. But my argument is that I'd much rather be at the table than not be at the table. And it's better to have these conversations in broad daylight than for them to be happening behind closed doors. Not that certain conversations still don't happen behind closed doors. Either way, that was the point I was making, whether people like it or not. And it was just very much taken out of context. And again, some of the other points they made later in the piece about why Bitcoiners have sort of like gravitated to government officials so much and this warm embrace from government officials. I gave more context to that. And because they ignored that, it really felt unsettling to me because I'm like, I told you why we did this. I don't know why you guys are spinning it like this. And it's sad to see. I used to be a really active NPR listener. I really like the network in general. I haven't really listened in years, and I have no real impetus to go back and listen after what just happened. So just some details about what happened there.
Yep. And it is, there are a couple of rabbit holes we can go down here, but the broader one of this corruption issue, you can't really fault an organization like NPR. Like let's take it as a given that they have biases and prejudices.
Sure.
You can't fault them under these conditions for going after Trump for the corruption stuff, right? Even if you think there's no actual corruption, the thing about corruption is it's like the perception or the reality is kind of the same thing.
Yep.
And even if you're totally on board with everything that Trump and his family and everyone has done for the past few months, the reality on the ground is that now it's a huge source of ammunition for Democrats, and it is coming up. It came up in the market structure hearing yesterday.
It came up many times in the market structure.
Every single hearing. Yeah. I was actually reviewing all of the federal bills that have been introduced just related to Bitcoin, digital assets, crypto, and I hadn't kept track of them all, but it's kind of funny. There are like a dozen different resolutions and bills. Like every Democrat on the floor is introducing their own version of some kind of politically motivated bill, but either banning the Trumps or introducing new legislation to ban anybody, like any sitting elected official, from engaging with crypto, benefiting from it. Even the
plus family members.
Plus family. Yeah. There was even there was actually, I can't remember who it was, but there was articles of impeachment filed against Trump a couple of weeks ago, and this was one of the grounds within. Now, I read that bill, and it is, I wouldn't say it's watertight, but this is one of the grounds in it. So anyway, this is the whole conversation, but I guess we shouldn't be that surprised that it's being pursued zealously.
Yeah, and I also think what's sad is that I think that there are things that can be parsed here, like they can be sort of taken apart. Like I think the meme coin is more flagrant than like his son having a DeFi thing or something like that. I think that's...
Or the Bitcoin mining company, which Senator Warren was mentioning yesterday, right?
Correct. And I think the one thing that gets overlooked here, and this bothers me a lot, to be really honest, is like, okay, there's Trump comes out as the first crypto president. I get it. His sons are involved in crypto, all this stuff, and he launches a meme coin. Okay, fine. I get it. But like, as if what Nancy Pelosi was doing in traditional markets was just okay. Granted, she wasn't the president, but like, get your own house in order is my thoughts here if you want to start critiquing other people. I mean, there's literally an act that's right now, I think it's sitting in the House. I don't think it went anywhere, but it's called the Pelosi Act. And it's an acronym for like getting politicians to stop insider trading or something like that. Not the exact same situation, but definitely something, if we're going to talk about this sort of corruption with high level officials, including the president, like we really can't overlook that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And again, not to preempt our hearing chat, but I did kind of roll my eyes a little bit at one of the witnesses yesterday talking about, the emoluments laws and this whole idea that whatever Trump is doing with crypto is like completely unprecedented in the history of our republic over 250 years. The idea that publicly elected representatives would be enriching themselves, it's horrifying and unprecedented. It's like, come on, guys, let's be serious.
Yeah, but also I can't wait to talk about that. Was what's his name? I think you're referring to Richard Painter. He's one of my new favorite characters. We'll get to him. He's
quite a character. All right, so before we do that, one thing I just wanted to cover off because this is exciting. I'm excited about it. I know you maybe have a little more insight on it too. The Bitcoin Policy Institute have released a state-level strategic Bitcoin reserve toolkit, which is a blueprint for U.S. states to hold Bitcoin in treasury and do a bunch of other great things too. So, I mean, you can check out this post on X. It's great, kind of primer. But then, of course, what you should really do is open the PDF, which they have published publicly. They have even open sourced it, which we can chat about in a moment. And there's this, as the name would suggest, it is a blueprint for states to follow to get their SPRs up and running, which I've been paying a lot of attention to this year. And there's still a lot of work to be done. So kudos to Bitcoin Policy Institute. Any other insights, Frank, into what's going on behind the scenes on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So Zach announced, Zach Shapiro, who's the head of policy at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, announced that he was going to be creating this document and this sort of open source way of approaching it at the Bitcoin for America event, which I think Bitcoin Policy Institute hosted in March of this year. It was a few months back. So he announced it there. I spoke with Zach personally about this stuff. And yeah, he's really, really adamant about looking at all of the bills that are out there, kind of pulling the best stuff from those bills and saying, this is sort of what best practices look like. Everything from like how you're custodying the assets to how you're accumulating Bitcoin, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's actually super, super cool. For those who don't know, I want to give a quick shout out to Zach Shapiro. We're very lucky to have this person in the space as a lawyer. Not only does he do this sort of great work for the Bitcoin Policy Institute, he's also the person that set up the P2P Rights Fund, which is the fund that's been, what's the word, receiving donations to defend the likes of the Samurai developers and who we just mentioned, Roman Storm, and these open source devs. So Zach is like, I think, graduated top of his class at Yale Law School, this and that. Like, he could kind of probably have gone into anything regarding law, and we're very lucky that he chose Bitcoin and open source development because he's doing great stuff. And I know he's really passionate about Bitcoin state level SPRs, especially as compared to the federal, because states can't print their own money. So when a state having Bitcoin on the balance sheet, I think it's much more of a it has much more of an impact because they have real they have their own state level funding that they have to deal with for not only for their services that they provide, but for retirement, for their civil servants and all that stuff. And it's much more important. So I'm really excited to see as this develops. And I'm not sure, I don't have an email address to share or anything, but if you do have ideas for what a state level SPR should look like, I'm sure there's sort of like a contact at Bitcoin Policy Institute email address on their website. Please feel free to let them know. I know they're really they're incredibly smart people over there, but they're also very open-minded. So when they say that this is open source, they mean it, and please feel free to contribute ideas.
Great. Yeah. I'm really excited about it. I think it's that point that you mentioned is the key one, which is at the state level. Like, states can't print their own money, right? They are beholden to revenues that they bring in.
Yep.
And in particular, this is something that I've spoken about, and I won't spend a ton of time on it, but one thing that's really underappreciated about states as well is many of them, well, they all have pension funds and retirement funds for public employees. Many of them across the country are kind of critically underfunded as well, and so it's great to see. It's great to see states adopting, reserve strategies with their treasuries, but they have to do something. So many of them about how to make up this gap in funding for these obligations that they owe.
Yep.
Over the next couple of decades.
Yep.
I haven't seen many great proposals for how they're going to get there. They're not really beating the S&P by enough, right? So other than Bitcoin, I'm not sure there is a way. So 100%. And it's something that we have seen in some of these reserve bills, right? It's authorizations for state pension funds to use Bitcoin.
Yep.
So yeah, really exciting. Go and check out the document from Bitcoin Policy Institute. Yep. Let's now get into, I guess, the meat of recent news, which is I think there was a kind of a fancy title for this hearing for the Senate.
Yeah,
crypto, Web3, something else.
From Wall Street,
market structure.
Yeah, from Wall Street to Web3 and something : blah blah blah. But yeah, I did a write up on it yesterday for Bitcoin Magazine.
Yeah. So this was the Senate Banking Committee talking about market structure, and again, it's like how many? I think it was one of the witnesses, Timothy Massad. It may have been him, but someone made a funny comment yesterday. It's like, this is Groundhog Day. Like, how many of these hearings on market structure are we going to have?
And to be honest, I've been in almost every single one of them. It felt that way, and it was so stale. It was just the same thing over and over. Nothing, and I feel bad saying this because it's like my job's going to stop sending me to DC to cover this stuff. But it's like, it's just this weird, like, everybody sort of gets their 2 cents in, and we never get anywhere. Like, it's the same talking points, blah blah blah.
I don't want to say these things are a waste of time, But when you watch enough of these things, you realize how much of it is like scripted theater, essentially,
Totally.
right? It's like the Democrats get to pick their witnesses, Republicans get to pick theirs. Everybody circulates the questions and answers beforehand, right? So everybody knows everything that, almost actually, with a couple of funny exceptions, everything knows everything that's going to be said in these. Occasionally, you'll get some committee members going off script, but it's not only kind of pre-arranged, but as you say, it's like it's a bit of a broken record. It's like
100%.
Why do we need clarity? Answer: clarity is really good because it provides clarity to people, to my company. Great, we know that.
Yeah. It's quite. I'm going to send you, if you don't mind. I'm going to send you my article on this. I'm not sure if you got a chance to see it yesterday or before. Let me just bring it up as we're talking here. But it's something worth noting. So I pulled out sort of 3 big themes. One of them is just people talking about, harping on sort of what they consider to be a conflict of interest or corruption within the Trump family. But there were 2 other things that I think came out of it that are really important. But as I'm bringing that up, please feel free to continue.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the. I don't know if it was on your Twitter feed.
No, I didn't share it only because I didn't want to inundate people, so I did a long tweet thread about it. Let me drop it over to you in the chat here, and so you have it. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of parsed out a few themes, but let's first touch on what we have on the agenda here. Because I think that there are some important points to be made, and then I'll so
that's right. I guess so. It's like, what are the takeaways, despite the kind of somewhat kind of repetitive nature of these hearings, where it feels like we don't get a lot done. There were a couple of meaningful takeaways that came out of it. One, I think, is just to get a sense of. In some ways, it's actually more interesting to hear what the opposition has to say. At least I find, even though I don't necessarily agree with it, but Timothy Massad, who has a senior position, I think, at the Kennedy School at Harvard, perhaps.
That's
he
correct.
kind of spoke, and it was a former CFTC commissioner.
Former CFTC chair, head of the CFTC.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of spoke out against the Clarity Act, which is, when we're talking about market structure, we're talking about the Clarity Act here. He kind of spoke against it, mentioned a few problems, which I think anybody who's following this closely, it's just good to get a sense of, well, what is the other side saying? I think a couple of his points were that, and this one I kind of agree with, the first general argument against something like the Clarity Act is that it's going to be locking in definitions for how very important terms are defined indefinitely into the future, like what is a security and what is a commodity, which, at least on principle, this makes a degree of sense to me, right? There's been so much uncertainty around this, and frankly, there still is. Like everything that's in this crypto world, what's the right way to think of it? To me, anyway. So this is the point from Timothy Massad, which is, hey, it would probably be better to have a looser principles-based approach for figuring this out than just trying to codify in statute, and which is going to figure everything out for everybody forever. So that was one general point he made.
And also, just on that note, if you don't mind, so that was one of the 3 things. That was one of my main takeaways from it, was so that term principles-based approach. You just said it, and so the argument there was, Massad kept, and he also he likes to clarify his name so it doesn't sound like Massad. It's Tim Massad.
Massad, you're right.
Yeah. I've interviewed him before, and he's a super interesting guy, but he likes to clarify that. He harped very, very strongly on the SEC and the CFTC working together, which I have mixed feelings about. I didn't publish this in my article. I kind of laughed when Brad Garlinghouse was like, I just can't, this is my own bias as a journalist, but it's like when Brad Garlinghouse speaks, I just recoil and feel sad. But it's anyway, he talked a lot about the SEC and the CFTC working together. Brad Garlinghouse said, well, that presupposes that we have, good characters sort of leading each of these organizations, obviously taking a jab at Gary Gensler.
Which was actually a fairly, I felt like a fairly wild thing for a witness in a Senate hearing to imply, not even imply, it's directly stating that like the agencies are compromised, right?
Yeah.
But again, anyway, no one really took too much offense to that.
So. No, I don't. Yeah, I think that was just. But I think that goes back to also it being like very scripted and like there's no real. aside from the few emotional reactions that did happen, which we'll touch on in a second, there's not a lot of anything other than people reading their lines and just sort of like moving through it. But anyway, he said this. He said he wants to see more working together between the SEC and the CFTC. He said explicitly the solution is not for Congress to become the regulator, which touches on what you just said, coming up with like very strict statutes or rules. He doesn't want to see that happen. This term principles-based approach, someone had to have come up with this beforehand, because you also had Senator Katie Britt use this term. Yeah. And then I think it was Mersinger also brought this up. Mersinger,
you could tell that the talking points had been circulated effectively.
No question. Yeah. So yeah, Mersinger, the CEO of Blockchain Association. What Mersinger said, I think, is also in line with what the crypto industry more broadly wants to see. Is she did sort of agree with the SEC and the CFTC working together, but she would like to see the CFTC have more power over things and just have a little bit more sway, which I think most of I think that the word on the street there is just that the CFTC tends to be a bit more lenient than the SEC, and that's what these sort of crypto advocates are looking for, a little bit more leniency here. But this principles-based approach thing, definitely heard that and was like, okay, that's the new thing. And I made a note in my article. I said neither Mersinger nor Massad nor Senator Britt provided any color as to what these principles, what will look like. So,
yeah. Exactly. Principles based on the Howey test, which is like, we just get back to square one, right?
Correct. We're back to square one. Correct.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. So, okay. A lot of same old, this kind of Clarity Act structure discussion. There were two big takeaways for me. One was one thing that Elizabeth Warren had to say, because I feel like it then influenced something else that Hester Pierce posted about yesterday, and then the New York Times picked up on. We'll get to that. The first thing is, one of the witnesses, this is by far the most entertaining part of the hearing, right? One of the witnesses, a gentleman named Richard Painter, who I believe is a former, actually Bush II administration official.
White House ethics lawyer.
White House ethics lawyer, yeah, and then has since, ethics lawyer, he's gone after Trump, I think, several times over several years for ethics concerns. He is, I think, now a budding political candidate himself. I think he ran for a primary election in maybe Minnesota it's kind of you probably know more about this than me. It's like the Democrat Farmers Labor Party or something, which is maybe part of the Democrat Party. In any case, he's kind of he's clearly I don't want to slander him. He's not an apparatchik, but he's been placed there by, Elizabeth Warren or whoever else is responsible.
Totally. Yeah.
Been placed on this committee by Elizabeth Warren to do exactly what he did, which was go very hard after Trump on corruption grounds, ethical grounds, and also just generally, he opened his testimony with this big spiel about how, it was like so melodramatic and ominous. He invoked the Great Depression. He invoked the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression and the failure to regulate banks properly 100 years ago, and how will we cannot make these mistakes again, right? So very melodramatic, very entertaining. And then, of course, Senator Kennedy was not going to let this slide. Senator Kennedy, of course, being a Republican, was not going to let this slide, and he had a very funny exchange with Mr. Painter, which I'm going to try and play now. If everybody can bear with me for a moment, and we'll see if we can get this to work.
Yeah. For the record, what he's about to play, I was sitting probably about 7 to 10 feet away from Richard Painter as he did this, or as this exchange was going on, and I thought it was like something I was experiencing being there in person. Like, is this really what's happening right now? Like, maybe this isn't really, I don't know, something very strange. But it was quite a moment. I think I tweeted that they were going at it like two school children fighting it out on the playground or something.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's have a listen.
Mr. Painter, do you think Senator Gillibrand is a crook?
No, and I do not think all politicians are crooks.
And why did you call her a crook?
I did not call her a crook. Now, Senator, you need to focus on this bill. Right, you're doing this again. You did it the last hearing. You need to read the bill.
Role in stablecoin regulation, $217,000 in crypto donations. You tweeted that.
Yes, I do.
And then you said The crypto industry is buying Congress and the White House. This won't end well. Why do you think the crypto industry is buying Senator Gillibrand?
I said, look at the campaign contributions from this industry.
Do you think they've bought her?
No, I said, look at the campaign contributions.
You said they bought her. Do you think they bought her?
Senator, you need to focus on this bill instead of trying to distort my Twitter.
Last time, one of my
you
colleagues
were quoting what a Marxist in Chicago said about
And what evidence do you have that she's a crook?
I said there is massive amount of campaign contributions coming into this Congress from the crypto industry.
Do you want to apologize to Senator Gillibrand?
I do not want you to have to apologize for passing legislation
that destroys our economy. For calling
you are distorting what I said, just like you did in the last hearing. You're wasting everybody's time, Senator.
You're a whack job.
Senator,
you are wasting.
Well, I think we are
next level whack job.
I think we are.
Is this middle school, Senator?
Senators and witness. Thank you both.
I think you should apologize, Senator.
I think Senator.
There you have it. Senator Kennedy calling Mr. Richard Painter a whack job and imploring him to apologize to Senator Gillibrand. I hope I don't have a chat in front of me. This is why people always talk to chat so they can see what's going on. I hope that worked and everybody could see what was going on there.
Yeah, I was watching it over here on my other computer. It looks like everything went through all right.
Great.
Everything was playing all right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a fascinating exchange. I wasn't aware, I guess, of Mr. Painter's pointed criticisms about the level of lobbying that's gone on from the crypto industry. But of course, many others have drawn attention to that over the past few months, particularly after the 2024 election cycle, right, where it was extremely influential.
Yep.
So that's kind of the most fun moment of the hearing. The other for me, maybe the most interesting takeaway in terms of what anybody said in the hearing was this one that I also just want to show now from Elizabeth Warren herself. So this one's a bit shorter, and then we'll break it down.
We need to make sure that any new legislation to regulate crypto market doesn't do more harm than good. And there are a couple of areas where I think we need to be very careful not to make things worse. First, we cannot pass any legislation that eats away at the SEC's current jurisdiction to regulate traditional securities. Now, Mr. Masson, you were chair of the CFTC and you were Assistant Secretary for Treasury for Financial Stability. Could market structure legislation make it possible to structure a non-crypto product so that it dodges our security laws? Use something like Tesla stock as an example.
Yes, it certainly could. If you, for example, provide an exemption for activity on decentralized trading protocols, and that's a very broad exemption, then you could tokenize Tesla stock and have it traded on that protocol, and it could be exempt then from 34 Act trading requirements at least.
So in effect, we start to repeal the SEC as...
I'm going to pause there. So, okay, this is an interesting question because it's topical at the moment, right? A couple of pieces here. One is, okay, so what's going on? We're talking about tokenizing securities. This is the issue that Senator Warren is driving at. Would the Clarity Act allow this kind of loophole whereby securities, stocks, could be tokenized, put on a protocol of some kind, and then kind of wash themselves of the security designation, right? And then become, whether if it's on a DeFi protocol, they become kind of exempt from these laws. Unintended consequence, you have securities not being treated as securities, right?
Yep.
That's what she's driving at here. A couple of things. One thing worth noting out, it's no accident that the example that she uses Tesla stock, right? Whilst of course President Trump and his family have provided a lot of ammunition for crypto industry criticism recently, the Democrats are never going to miss an opportunity now to kind of implicate Elon Musk in any way, shape, or form that they can in anything with a whiff of corruption or mispropriety. So that's why she's using Tesla stock as the example there for sure. Okay, so this is the issue. Could this happen? Is this a loophole allowed by the Clarity Act? Mr. Masad believes the answer is yes. But okay, so what happened? Later that afternoon, yesterday, after this kind of exchange happened in this hearing, although perhaps it was coincidental, maybe not, Hester Peirce over at the SEC published a statement, a memo, making certain things very clear, namely that you cannot, I'm just going to, it's a short memo, folks can kind of read it themselves. There's basically one really important line that, or one paragraph, I should say, kind of a line in here that kind of gets to the heart of it. If you have a token that is a receipt, in effect, a receipt for a security, that's still a security. This is what she's saying.
Correct.
You can't turn something into a non-security merely by giving someone a receipt for it and putting it on a blockchain. So, does this answer Elizabeth Warren's question and Mr. Masad's objection? Is this something you actually have to worry about in the Clarity Act? Well, maybe actually Hester Peirce is saying, no, you don't need to, because this is covered by existing law and SEC practices, that security is security, it doesn't matter what you call them.
Yep.
The other interesting thing to note about this is, well, this is also topical because I think just this last week, Robinhood announced a new product or a new platform through which exactly this is kind of happening, where stocks on Robinhood are tokenized in some way, put on Ethereum layer 2, and then are traded, right? And so I'm pretty sure that that the Robinhood folks had been in contact with the SEC over a period of time, maybe to try and clarify this in advance. But it seems like Hester Peirce is saying this is well, the law is clear enough, but the practice is unresolved, and maybe a bit of a shot across the bow for industry participants who are planning on jumping into this.
I think also, just as let's just say retail people, if this is your thing, trading some sort of tokenized stock, I've seen people sharing on X, they're trading Fartcoin for Tesla X stock now. Like you're buying a representation of a stock that has to be held by a regulated entity. That the stock has to be held by a regulated entity. It's not like the blockchain now holds your stock certificate. Like that's still happening on the back end by a regulated entity. So could there be some sort of situation where you're buying some sort of tokenized version of a stock and there's no actual claim to that? Sure. I don't think we're even close to figuring that out from a legal perspective. So from a retail angle, I would just say, if that's your thing, if you're trading stocks on the blockchain, just understand that you're not really trading stocks on the blockchain. You're trading a tokenized representation of a stock that's still held by a certain institution, ideally, so just something to think about. Not a place that, if that's not my thing to begin with, but like not a place that I would really be playing around with right now. Just a quick thing, Julian, before I forget. So I think because we're doing this through Google Meet as we're having this thing, I think we have only 6 minutes. I just noticed. Can we sign back in? Do you think? And start
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So if you get kicked, we're gonna plug the leaks on the ship live.
That's it.
Yeah, if you get kicked, I think you should be able to jump back in, or we'll figure it out in a couple of minutes. Yeah.
That's it. Cool. Sounds good. Awesome. A last thing I just wanted to mention about the hearing, which I thought was actually really important. So obviously Elizabeth Warren took her opportunity to go hard after illicit finance that happens on the blockchain and blah, 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 blah. And I was actually quite nervous. So there was someone named, there was this founder of Chainalysis was there, and I'm not a big Chainalysis guy. A lot of their data, it's proven to not, like some of the conclusions that they come to, the likes of Lola Leeds and other really good journalists have proven that their methods are not really watertight. So Jonathan Levin is the guy, and he was actually he had a few quotes that I thought were just absolute bangers yesterday. So Warren brought up, but illicit finance, and as the market cap of crypto has grown, so has illicit finance, and blah, blah, blah. He provided some great context. He said that illicit activity is less than 1% of the overall activity that occurs on the blockchains. And he said that this number is actually higher in traditional financial markets. I actually thought that was quite a statement. Majority of the activity on blockchains is legitimate activity, he added. He did say that crypto mixers make things a little bit more difficult for Chainalysis to do their job, but he didn't outright condemn them. He didn't say like crypto mixers are terrible and blah, 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 blah. He did say, though, he said, we have seen less use of crypto mixers in terrorist financing than you might expect. So I actually thought it was a great situation to hear someone like that pushing back against Warren, who leads, I feel like, every single one of these hearings with something about how crypto is only for money launderers and blah, blah, blah.
Terrorists and criminals. And,
correct. Yeah. So I thought that was actually really important. I actually led with that in the article because I just don't think we hear enough pushing back from figures like that. Someone, the founder of Chainalysis, I was really nervous that he was going to say, you know what, you're right. And he was going to be there to essentially support the things she was saying, but that did not turn out to be the case.
Yeah, I guess the thing that's best for his business would be to inflate the potential scope,
the numbers,
of,
right? Yeah,
of illicit activity in the industry, right? But he would very much said like, hey, it's less than 1%. It's not a huge deal, and we just kind of play whack-a-mole with the few bad actors that we find. So
that's it.
Yeah.
All right, I have an idea here. So instead of letting the time on this call run out, should we log off and then log back in? And then what's the plan? Do it same link, or how does it work?
Yeah, why don't you? Let's see if I can. No, I can't do that. Why don't you just jump out?
Okay.
Jump out now. Try and jump back in, and we'll see what.
Let's see if that
happens. Okay, so while Frank does that, and appreciate everybody's patience on that. Okay. One moment, folks. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay. Okay, so Frank will be back with us momentarily. In the meantime, I'm going to quickly move on to what's next on the agenda. In fact, this is kind of a me topic anyway. So why don't we're going to quickly cover off some things that happen at the state level in Bitcoin policy this week. And I think before I do that, actually, Frank was very speedy on the rejoin, so I think he's back. Frank,
did we make it happen?
I think we made it happen. I think that worked.
Interesting. Wow. I feel like we that was kind of like the Ethereum merge or something. We replaced the engine in mid-flight and
yeah, exactly. That's hot fix.
Yeah.
That's what I think. That's the term.
I like it. It's the Bitcoin spirit here. Let's just make it happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I was about to jump into the next thing on the agenda, which is just covering off very briefly things that happened at the state level this week, and there wasn't a ton of it, but four different Bitcoin related bills are moving through the California Assembly right now. In fact, no, Assembly and Senate. Two in the Assembly, two in the Senate. There's a stablecoin bill. There's a bill for unclaimed property. There is a kind of a state payments related bill. So there's a lot of stuff going on in California, and all of it progressing, on schedule. None of it that controversial. So the stablecoin bill is kind of just an update to existing law, that being SB 97. Although it's interesting, I was watching the proceedings and some of the hearing, I should say, in the Banking and Finance Committee. Some high-profile folks turned up in support of it. There was a representative from A16Z, and some other folks who turned up in Sacramento to just voice their support for updating the stablecoin law that's already on the books in California. But I think the idea here is, and the assemblyman who introduced it, whose name escapes me, I think he was kind of saying they're anticipating the Genius Act passing, and so this is kind of getting getting things in line, getting things ready to be in line with federal legislation there.
Okay.
So that's a little bit of what happened in California this week.
Does seem like the Genius Act at this point. I don't even the vibe in DC is sort of a foregone conclusion that it's going to pass. And just a quick note on that, I will say that I think myself included, I should say, we'll kind of have a bit of a breakdown if we do just get a stablecoin bill and nothing related to Bitcoin. I'm really gonna fling myself directly out of the nearest window I can find if that's the way things fall, if that's the way the cookie crumbles. So ideally the Genius Act is the beginning of momentum and other things. But I did say to someone yesterday, I was just like, Genius, and then I guess market structure, and then the Bitcoin Act, and they just laughed at me. I was like, we're not going to get to the Bitcoin Act, and they were like, I was like, okay, I'm getting sad. I'm getting sadder here. So.
Yeah, the Bitcoin Act, of course, folks, being Senator Lummis's federal strategic Bitcoin reserve bill. Basically a carbon copy of the bill that she introduced last year as well.
And Representative Begich introduced it in the House, I guess a sister version of the bill. And on that note, keep an eye out. I'll be releasing my interview with Congressman Nick Begich today on X and on YouTube. OG Bitcoiner was buying Bitcoin on Mt. Gox starting in 2011 or 2012 or something like that. Crafted, as I said, reintroduced the same act in the House. Ideally, we see this voted upon before midterms, because I think while there's still momentum, let's just say that. But the great thing about that act is it not only codifies into law the right for the government to establish an SPR, but it codifies into law the right for Americans to hold their private keys to their Bitcoin. And while some people might think that that's already the case, it is based on case law, like on precedent that's happened in courts, but not necessarily something that's been codified into law via the legislative process. So we want to see that happen.
Yeah. The Bitcoin Act is great. I think what I like about it is it's a bit of a model that it can serve as a model for perhaps states who are looking at maybe what the best practice is. And I think it's like the best possible articulation of what a Bitcoin forward reserve bill, and not just reserve, as you said, enshrines custody rights and other things. So it's great to have this stuff drafted and certainly introduced. But are we going to see it pass this session? I don't want to. I'm not going to say bearish things. I'm not going to.
Let's not get sad. Yeah, we're not going to get sad.
Okay. One other thing. Moving on. Something I've been working on. A quick personal plug for folks who are familiar with Bitcoin laws. You may have seen a version of this map floating around on X. I'm working on for folks who are. This is not published yet. It's not released yet. Coming soon. A pro version of Bitcoin laws, which will allow folks to kind of get in and do a bunch of different things, get access to a whole suite of data on all the bills, but also make some charts and maps of your own if you're into that kind of thing too, and just visualize all the data in different ways. So including looking at the different types of laws that have been introduced and passed and worked on around the country. So for example, you can see, this is kind of cool, I hadn't seen this before, but this is kind of a map of all the states that have introduced mining-related legislation. So you can take a look at that. Maybe you want to have a look at the kiosk and ATM legislation, and we can see several states around the country have done that too. So just one thing that I'm working on behind the scenes. If anybody would like to learn more about this, I'll be publishing this next week. But you can subscribe to my Substack. I think it's just Bitcoin Laws on Substack. And I will be letting you all know about it very soon.
Love it. Appreciate that. I'm super pumped with everything you're building. Not just saying that because I'm on the stream with you. It's I've said it many times, it makes my job easier. But generally speaking, I really think you're tapping into a need and a desire for people to learn more and follow along. And I think making it interactive, letting people make their own maps and play around with the stuff, I think it's going to be huge. So pumped to see that come to fruition. Oh, of course. Yeah.
Thanks, man. No, it means a lot.
Yeah, of course.
Well, cool. Well, I think that pretty much brings us to the end. I guess just flagging, what's coming up next week. We probably should make note of the fact that it is, officially going to be Crypto Week, at least according to the GOP House Financial Services Committee. So 3 different pieces of legislation are going to be, considered I think if you dig into the press release, you can learn a little bit more about exactly what that means. But
Yeah.
the Clarity Act, the Genius Act, and then the Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act we should expect news on all three of these next week. So I presume, Frank, you're going to be in DC next week.
No, so oddly enough, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be skipping Crypto Week in DC, which sounds strange,
yes.
but only because I'll be in New York, in the Southern District of New York, in the court system at the trial for Roman Storm.
Right.
Stay through my X handle. You will be seeing me doing video updates throughout the week. So I'll be doing video updates from outside the courthouse. I'll also be doing write-ups on BitcoinMagazine.com. There's also, if people want, I very rarely plug this, but it's worth plugging. If you do Frank Corva Bitcoin Magazine, go to my author page. You can also subscribe to, I do a weekly newsletter where everything I cover all week, I provide links to it. So if you want to do that, and we just set up an RSS feed as well, if you're a little bit more technically savvy and want to make sure you're getting all the updates, especially as it pertains to this Roman Storm case, that's great. I'll be doing my best to keep an eye on what's happening in DC. I might have to lean on you a little bit for that, Julian. You might have to maybe we're going to have a lot to talk about next week.
See what I can do.
Yeah. A lot to do next week. But yeah, it's going to be, I actually, deep down, I'm excited. The DC stuff is fine. I'm excited. I'm not excited for Roman Storm nor the Samurai devs that these sort of trials are now happening, but there's been so much of a lead up to this. They were arrested, I think, like over a year ago at this point, these developers. So to actually be getting to the trial portion where we're going to find out what's going on, I'm excited that we're here, only because I think there's been a lot of anxiety around this, and we want to start seeing what's actually going to happen. And also a quick thing, this is kind of not necessarily, well, could be related to the laws. The judge for the Samurai case I just saw this morning has been replaced. Oddly enough, the judge for the Samurai case was the judge for the Epstein case. Not that there would be any sort of relation between the two at all, but that judge has been replaced. I don't have any information on the new judge. I can't say I was a huge fan of the previous judge. He seemed kind of recalcitrant. He didn't seem like he wanted to listen too much to the defense's arguments. He wasn't outright flagrant. He also told, I've been at all the pretrial hearings for the Samurai case. He would also tell the prosecution to stop being so aggressive in the courtroom, and that the trial hadn't started, and that they shouldn't be, trying to make certain points yet. So that I thought was interesting. But we'll see with this new judge. We'll see what it is. I have to touch base with Zach Shapiro about this. Zach Shapiro also, who we mentioned earlier, was, I think, his early days, he was a law clerk in the Southern District. So Zach is right. He's the dude. He's the man when it comes to law and what's happening right now in the Bitcoin space or the open source development space. So I got to touch base with him, but I'll be there all week covering it. Like I said, updates from right outside the courthouse, articles on Bitcoin Magazine, and again, trying to keep my ear to the ground as much as possible. I guess checking my Twitter, which we can't actually have access to in the courtroom, but trying to follow what happens in DC as well. So
yeah, well, I guess we may or may not be able to do this again next week, but certainly we'll recap after your coverage of the case, and hoping for a great outcome, not just for those involved with the trial, but of course, as we said earlier, for open source software everywhere.
Yep. Absolutely. Amen. Yep. And for quick context for everyone, I think these are the most what's the word? Critical is not, that's not the exact word I'm looking for, but these cases are probably as important as the war over pretty good privacy, PGP, in the 90s that allowed for encryption on the internet. And actually, quick shout out, and I'm going to read this real quick if you don't mind. Senator Lummis absolutely crushed it. She had the second to last comments at the hearing yesterday, and I put a little segment of what she said in my article yesterday. She gave a shout out to the cypherpunks in a Senate hearing, which I was like, okay, like for those who don't know, the cypherpunks were these are the people that were working with encryption on the internet. The cypherpunks were without the cypherpunks, there'd be no Bitcoin. There's so many people like the Adam Backs of the world, if you will, the people who contributed to things like Bitcoin, not just to transfer value, but even to transfer information online. They were really big in the 80s and 90s developing this sort of technology. But to quickly quote Senator Lummis, you look at the internet, that the cypherpunks of the 80s and 90s who were creating code and using cryptography, and the government was afraid of it. So the NSA called cryptography a weapon and classified as something that should not be available to the general public, started Senator Lummis. But our courts in this country decided that cryptography and code writing is protected free speech under the First Amendment. And it was a game changer. Made it possible for those very brilliant minds to make available to each other through open source the cryptography and code writing that made it possible in 2009 for the first digital asset to appear on the scene. Now we're at a point in 2000 where from 2009 to where we are today, we have a mature industry that is asking us to provide clear rules of the road. We're in the right place at the right time to help these innovators to take their rightful place in the global economy. And an asset that is important to our country, that is important to individual freedom, that is important to the unbanked and underbanked, and that will make available to all people the opportunity to grow wealth as opposed to our own US dollar, which by design is decreasing in value. Kind of a banger there, but
yeah,
to the point, she's
Senator Lummis
going for it. So what's important here is that these cases really, as far as the future of transferring value over the internet, which wasn't a thing in the 80s and 90s, nobody had really figured that out yet in any way that got broadly adopted. There was eCash by David Chaum and a few other things, but these things really did not gain much traction. We're talking about the ability to transact privately on the internet at this point. So please keep an eye on, what's happening. Like I said, I'll be covering it. Some other journalists I know will be there too. I think Lola Leeds from The Rage will have a journalist there. So shout out to what they're doing, but really important stuff. And we'll recap it whenever we get the next opportunity to do so.
Yeah, well said. Can't wait for the coverage. And I guess on that note, thanks everybody for tuning in. This was fun. We will do it again soon. There will be much more to talk about. But until then, that is it for the weekly Bitcoin Laws update, I think.
Take it easy, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Much appreciated. Julian, great. Julian, also a round of applause for everyone watching. He's been the producer for this. He's been putting together the agenda. So big shout out to Julian. Thank you for all you're doing there. You're crushing it.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, take it easy, everybody. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.